Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. We are doing a regular video this week because, hey, I got this great new haircut, so why would I do slides when your hair looks this good? Seriously. Also, I didn't really prepare a presentation. That may be the other reason, but I got a lot in the works, a lot of great presentations about Jung, and maybe something about functional medicine will come up in relationship with Jung, what that means, maybe Chinese medicine in relationship with Jung, what he would have to say about it. Just to tease a few things, alchemy, we're going to talk about that some more. I've talked about it in recent podcasts or past podcasts, but we're going to keep talking about that because it is a crucial issue and you can't talk about it enough. I mean, that's the difficult thing about doing a presentation on a Jungian topic is, man, you're like, how do I really tackle this issue? And the answer is you don't tackle it because you can't really do it in a presentation, but you talk about certain aspects of it and just to give you, the listener, the viewer, a better idea of these concepts and how they relate to your psychological health. For this week, though, we're just going to do Q&A. Got a bunch of questions here. Haven't done one of these videos in a while, so we're doubling up. The first question: when does CBT work, or what do you say when CBT does work? You claim that it doesn't. No, I don't think that it doesn't work. I think it does work. I just think it's incredibly limited. And I think there's more issues going on than simply, oh, you have this one action you're taking that you don't want to take, well, take a different action. Oh, you have this one thought that you don't want to have, well, choose a different thought. And look, if you go to a cognitive behavioral therapist, I mean, that could be a huge improvement just because most of us are so disconnected. What I was talking about this week in my Infinite Jest video, simply talking to a bad therapist can be helpful, as long as he doesn't say too much. But that's why we have Unconscious Map, the course, animusempire.com/course. If all you have access to is bad therapy because of insurance, financial constrictions, then get the course. And it shows you what to talk about in therapy. Not only what to talk about, but what you're supposed to get out of therapy. We can do that within 12 weeks. Is that the entire therapeutic process? No, it's going to take longer than that, but we can get you on a good foothold, a good plinth from which you'll be able to achieve what you're supposed to achieve in therapy. And abstractly speaking, conceptually speaking, it's the same for all of us. I don't think CBT is wrong. I just think it's extremely limited. In my sessions, I use some cognitive behavioral therapy techniques, I guess you could say. I mean, implicitly I do. It's an important part of the process, but it's only one part, and it's only maybe 5-7% of it. And often when you look at, the cognitive behavioral therapy claims are ridiculous. I think I mentioned a couple weeks ago that it works 50% of the time or 75% of the time. That just means that the subject, the patient, feels better after the sessions. Well, like I just said, most of us are so disconnected that even going in and talking about something as mundane as our negative thoughts can be helpful. Hey therapist, I exist. I mean, my entire life, I've been walking around acting like I don't exist, like my needs don't matter. So just, paying attention to them, to that, to some extent, can be helpful. But man, therapy can be so much more. And it only comes when we really understand what psychology is on a philosophical level, not scientific. Maybe one day it will be scientific when we develop technology that we can't even comprehend right now. But for right now, it is just going to be philosophical. Which leads to the next question. Is psychology, this is in response to something I said, which I forget, but it doesn't matter. Is psychology then both a natural science and a social science? Well, it's neither. It's not one or the other, right? It's like this obsession with psychology being a science. It's neither here nor there. It's fundamentally a philosophy. So a natural science is based on observable, concrete facts. And this is why we want psychology to be a social science, because then we could base psychology then on a science that can feel scientific, and we can get a lot of government money, and oh, look how useful we are. Oh, we're just like physics and biology. But it's not that, it's philosophy. So a philosophy is like a science. I feel like I'm arguing with my dad here about this. He's a science guy, and he thinks that philosophy is like some woo-woo art thing, which maybe given the philosophy classes that my dad took in college, he could see it that way. But it's not that. It's very much like science. It's just what it's based on isn't observable, is not directly observable. You can't ostend it, right? You just can't point to it. That's what makes philosophy so difficult. And I think I made a tweet today, or maybe it was yesterday, about without Aristotle, philosophy would just be, I don't know, a rhetoric or something. Yeah, because what did Aristotle do? He broke philosophy down to its fundamental principles. And that's what psychology is. So psychology, instead of a science, instead of a natural science or a social science, it's a philosophy. It is not based on direct observable evidence, although we do see reflections of the concepts on which psychology is based, indirectly observable evidence. So, we're not just coming up with them out of the top of our head. But yeah, that's the difference. It's based on concepts. It's based on concepts that are that cannot be refuted. To refute them would be to employ the concept. I mean, this is why I break down anxiety and anger, why these can be fundamental, why these must necessarily be fundamental to psychology. Very much like the law of identity in philosophy. You can't deny the law of identity without invoking it. You can't deny the existence of anxiety, how I define it. To do that, you would just have to completely deny psychology as a legitimate science, or legitimate philosophy, excuse me. And I understand people out there deny psychology as a legitimate philosophy. That's fine. If you've ever been in a situation where you're doing something that you don't want to do, or you're not doing something that you do want to do, you are implicitly understand that psychology is a real field. Yeah, but it's not a natural science. I mean, is it based in part on natural science? Sure. Can emotions be observable through natural science? Of course. We can look at brain scans and we can look at, oh, look, this is what anxiety does. This is what anxiety does in everybody. It has this similar look. It involves these parts of the brain. But we just don't have the technology to carry out psychology through simply brain scans and what our amygdala doing or what our HPA complex is doing. We just don't have that yet. Maybe we will at some point, but until then, psychology is going to be a philosophy. Next question: why does work set man free? I mentioned this in some blog posts. Well, I mean, it's a reflection of a self-sufficient psychology. You need to be productive on some level. I'm not the first one to say this. You need to be productive on some level if you want to live. I mean, you need to produce goods. You need food, water, shelter. On some level, you need to produce things to sustain your life. A lion does the same thing, a little bit different way, much more simple way, but we just do the same thing a lion does. And that's why you need to be free, because if you don't produce for yourself, you end up being reliant on somebody else. And this goes right to how to manage your emotions. The principles I lay out for, the fundamental principles of your psychology. If you don't do your own work, you must rely on somebody else. And exactly. You have to. It is irrefutable that if you don't work to produce what you need for your own life, then you must necessarily rely on somebody else. And what does produce mean? This goes right to, what I talk about with confronting anxiety and asserting anger. You don't just confront your anxiety for the sake of it. You don't assert your anger. You don't get your needs met for the sake of it. You do it as a way of being productive. This is how we take these emotions, these things that are part of our action, are necessarily a part of our action. If we didn't have emotions, we wouldn't have action. All the Twitter gurus out there are saying, just don't worry about your emotions. Ignore your emotions and just do what's right. Well, if you're doing something on an emotional way, in an emotional way. The only question is, are you aware of it? You gotta, it's not just doing away with your emotions. It's understanding where your emotions come from and how they influence your actions. That's the important thing. So without work, you're necessarily a slave to somebody else, because you're necessarily relying on somebody else for sustenance. Am I growing out of my boyfriend? This is me asking. Question from a listener. Am I growing out of my boyfriend She says that she's with somebody now who she may not have been with, knowing what she knows. So she's gone through some psychological change and she's seeing things in a different way. And she's like, man, knowing what I know now, I don't know how long she's been with him. Maybe like, let's just say a year. Well, knowing what I know now, if I knew what I know now last year, I would not have gotten with this guy. So what do I do? Well, I mean, this is a natural part of, relationships. The first thing to do would be to communicate with him about what's going on and how you've changed and how it's really important to you that you have changed and how he may need to change too. I mean, maybe you've already talked to him about this and that's why you're asking me, but a lot of these questions that you have, especially around other people, just say what you say to me, what you write to me in an email, and just say it to that person. That's probably the thing you ultimately need to do. But I understand we need to talk about these things just to get a better understanding of them, so it makes it easier to do the things that we need to do. But yeah, this is very common in relationships. And that's what happens sometimes. People in relationships, they grow apart. You see this a lot if the guy and the girl are both fat when they meet, and then one of them starts to get thin. Well, guess what? They're probably going to break up unless the other one also loses the weight. Same thing with, drug addiction. If they're both drinkers and one person gets sober, the other person pretty much needs to get sober, otherwise they're going to grow apart. Now, I know it doesn't happen all the time, and especially if the couple's a little bit older and they just live with it. But again, they're just living with the relationship. They're not really happy. Yeah, but this goes to everybody out there. I mean, if you see the other person in your relationship improving, and they're talking to you about how they're improving, and it's a big deal to them, and they want to get you involved, that's not just your girlfriend nagging. That's not just your wife nagging or your boyfriend being mean. They're concerned. They're concerned about the relationship. And if they're growing in one way, you need to at least be on board in some respect. Maybe you can't grow as much as they are. Maybe you can't lose as much weight. But you have to at least understand where they're coming from and really get it, really empathize where they're coming from. Otherwise, you're just going to grow apart. So start by communicating with your boyfriend. That's the first thing you do. And if he doesn't get it, then yeah, you grow apart. You leave him. But not before you start communicating with him, and get really good at that. And I'm guessing that's part of the issue here. And maybe you said something to him, but do you really communicate? Can you really sit down and get through to him? Maybe that's part of what you've been working on. Now you're a better communicator. And you're realizing, man, he's such a terrible communicator. What am I doing with this guy? Well, if that's what it comes to, then it's going to be time to break up. But that's the decision that you need to make, not before you communicate, though. Another question, why do men with strong boundaries are in power positions? Not necessarily a strong boundary, and we'll get to it. In power positions like judges, lawyers, or CEOs visit dominatrixes and play the submissive part because they don't really feel like they're that position. They're just pretending. It's just a persona. So if some guy's a really powerful judge and then he goes to a dominatrix, that just indicates, well, when he's acting that judge part, he doesn't really feel that's who he is. He feels like an imposter. So he has to go to the dominatrix to live out this submission thing. It's just who you really feel you are. You project the opposite of that. That's the persona. That's not a well-integrated psyche. I mean, not a well-integrated psyche would be, no, I feel like I am this powerful person because I did put in all this work and look at how smart I am. So, maybe power does make me feel uncomfortable to some degree, but, I did the work. So that's why. It's their persona. And if you act like you're in power, then that is a lot of stress. That's a lot of stress on your psyche if you don't feel like you really deserve it. So you have to go to the dominatrix and she treats you how you really feel you need to be treated. So what's the solution here? Well, where's the anxiety coming from? How do we confront that? That would be the solution. What trauma are we avoiding here? How do we integrate this? How do we become first more aware of it and then learn how to integrate it into our psyche, predominantly by confronting our anxiety and asserting our anger? But if you don't do that, then yeah, just go to the dominatrix. And if she just makes you feel like the loser who you really do feel like. I mean, this is, a very like anytime somebody's complaining, oh, this person's not treating me right, blaming the victim. Oh, I know it's terrible, but no, you want them to treat you that way. If it happens on a consistent basis, now if you go to the store and some guy's a jerk to you and you're like, oh, that's weird, then that's really not him treating you how you really feel. But if this keeps happening on a consistent basis, then you want to feel that way. You want to feel low, lesser than, powerless. It's comforting. You just may be used to it, or it may satisfy you really not doing anything with your life. Like I said, nothing feels better than having the back of your hand firmly glued to your forehead. I mean, that is a great drug. You don't think you're an addict? Well, if you go around with the back of your hand glued to your forehead, you are. And it's important to recognize that. Next question. Problem with the roommate. He asked for a scoop of protein. Bro, you could tell this is one of my listeners. I asked my roommate for a scoop of protein. He didn't give me the protein. Oh, what do I do? This is terrible. Yeah. Hey, I just asked him for a scoop of protein. He didn't reciprocate. What's the big deal? And the other part of this is that he gave this roommate who's not giving him the scoop of protein, he gave him the big room in the apartment for a low price. So he thinks, hey, you got to be nicer to me. Let's look at how nice I am to you. Although you didn't really tell your roommate when you first met him that you were giving him the room at a better price. Even if you did, you're expecting something from this, right? And this is the covert contract. I'm going to do something nice for you and not really talk about it. Maybe I'll mention it once or twice, but because I did this nice thing for you, now you got to be nice to me. That's the covert contract. That is the boundary issue. Now, it can manifest in a bunch of ways. We call it a bunch of different things. We call it codependence. We call it narcissism. We call it BPD. But it is a boundary issue. You have a dysregulated emotion and you're trying to because you can't manage your emotions in a good way, you're trying to get get something. Well, we'll get to it here with narcissism. Get something, get some validation, something. Some emotional salve from your roommate. And the other thing is, I don't know, maybe it's annoying for your roommate to have you go around asking him for protein. I mean, that's it's not a big deal. And because it's not a big deal, why can't you get your own protein? My buddy Gavin, back in New York, he had a great story about this when he was kind of shocked into self-awareness. He was at a climbing gym and he asked some guy there who he barely knew, hey, could I borrow some chalk? And the guy said something, I think it was an older guy. And he said something to the effect of, oh, so you're a taker, aren't you? And it really got to him because he's like, yeah, I kind of am. I mean, is the chalk that big a deal? No, of course not. It's a fraction of a cent. That's not the point. The point is you go around and so you pack up to go to the climbing gym and you're like, oh, I don't need to get chalk. I don't need to spend that $5 on chalk. I'll just ask somebody. That's the issue. You just something about you can't feel like you can regulate on your own. So you need other people to act in a certain way. And this is the basis of the covert contract. And that's the basis of having a weak boundary. And another point I would make about this is you guys with small problems. You need bigger problems. You need huge problems. And this is part of going through psychotherapy is realizing that in some ways, these little squibbles, it's just a nothing. It's really an indication of why aren't you worried about way bigger things? You're not doing enough. You're focused so much on whether your roommate gives you protein. You're like, oh, but I gave him this room and he should be nice to me. No, go out, date 10 girls at the same time. Be out somewhere where they can see each other. Get dumped. Say something to make your mom cry. Start a company. Fail. Start 10 companies. Let's go. Why are we so focused on this small thing? Is because it's you're just trapped. That's part of the neurosis. It's just trapped, doing nothing, focusing on whether your roommate gave you a 30-cent scoop of protein. Oh, it's only 30 cents. Exactly. It's only 30 cents. That's a huge misconception about neuroses. It's you watch movies and neurosis they make neurosis and crazy people look really interesting. It's not. healthy people are interesting because they're out doing things. And they're like, oh, I tried this one thing. Ooh, that sure didn't work. And oh, I tried this other thing. That seems like a little bit more, and I studied 5 years doing this other thing, which got me prepared to do, it's just huge thinking, huge action. Where in truth, it's neurosis is the small thinking and the small action. So just, firm up that boundary. What are you really avoiding? What are you really not doing? I'm guessing that's something big. Next question. Whether it's possible to rehabilitate child soldiers. Can they be brought back? Well, in one sense, I don't know exactly the statistics on this. It depends how the child was carrying out the action. Like I said before, that if a child is 7 years old and initiating violence on other children, like, it's pretty much done. That's antisocial behavior. Way too late. 2 or 3, that's fine. They're still figuring it out. But by 7 or 8, if they're still doing that, then it's pretty much over. But it's not the same as a child being ordered to be violent. So then there's more of a chance of rehabilitation, because it's not really them doing it. They're just doing it because they're afraid. So it's right. It's not. It's essentially not of their own free will. So yeah, they definitely can be brought back. It's much, if that's what you're referencing when I talk about that, how if a child's 7 or 8 and they're going around punching other 7 or 8 year olds, it's pretty much over. It's not totally over, but it's pretty much over. And nobody really talks about that, but that's the truth. But yeah, I actually looked this up. There's really not a lot of good research on this, but that would be my supposition, is that it would be easier to bring back a child soldier to make him, able to live in society in a normal way. Because when he is a child forcing to shoot people, it's not really him doing it. Is there trauma there? Sure. I'm sure there's tons of trauma, but as far as being permanently damaged and unable to work with it, then yeah, I think he totally can. Next question. Are there any signs? So what are the signs in somebody's behavior that they have sexual abuse or incest abuse? Well, I think it's the signs of any other kind of abuse, just maybe more so. So if it's incest or sexual abuse, then it's going to come up most predominantly in relationships. So is it going to be like trust issues, fear of intimacy, fear of being alone, easily stressed by relationships, overwhelmed? It's going to be the same issues, just more so, more aggravated. Failure to separate from the person who abused you, failure to separate your identity. Now this could take 2 forms, right? This could take the forms of overt enmeshment or covert enmeshment, which would be, oh, I hate my mom so much. Oh, I hate my dad so much. I never want to be with a guy like my dad. But then you go out and then you date a guy who's exactly like your dad. Yeah, just this overly attached, this over-attachment to a parent's identity. And if there was any kind of severe sexual abuse, or it doesn't have to be that severe, just even mild sexual abuse on a child, then this is where you get, you want to go and abuse children who are of that age that you were when you were abused, as a way to, reenact the trauma, or maybe in a perverted way, get back what you lost. So if you were sexually abused at 10, this is how you find people who are sexually attracted to 10-year-olds. They're not really sexually attracted to them in the typical sense. They just feel like, oh, I'm going to get back my 10-year-old self by, going to the school in my unmarked van, giving candy to all those 10-year-olds, right? That's the kind of the sick thinking. That's not explicit thinking, but that's just implicitly what people are thinking as they're going through that. But that's the main stuff. It's just more of the same, more of what we all feel in a relationship, like, ooh, anxious, ooh, do they really like me? But extremely aggravated, and it just creates huge issues, because any normal person isn't going to be totally turned off by that, except for the people who are also abused or abusers, and then they link up and it makes sense. And yeah, you really got to go in and do that work for sexual abuse. If you were abused, or if you know somebody who was abused, um, yeah, you got to get to therapy for that. And especially, probably not group therapy at first for that, but after you get a good handle on your issues and what's going on, and you've at least given voice to the abuse that you've gone through. You've sat there across from somebody and recognized it, said it, recognized it, then you graduate on to group therapy, and that's going to be your life, most likely, for the rest of your life. I mean, that's just what you do. You know, if you're diabetic, you take insulin. If you're sexually abused, you got to go to these trauma groups for the rest of your life. This listener knows somebody, I guess, who has a porn addiction, but not addicted to one certain kind of porn. So what does that mean? If, like, typically, I guess guys are addicted to a certain kind of porn, it just means, you know, nothing specific. He just has a bunch of anxiety. That's why we use porn. Not because you're weak or stupid, but you just want to get out of yourself. There are anxious issues. Yeah, there's threats that you're avoiding. There's anxiety you're avoiding, and you don't know how to confront it unconsciously. So you get lost in this pleasing, you know, ostensibly pleasing medium. I mean, it's not. It's just a distraction, right? I mean, it gives you a dopamine hit, but you don't get dopamine hits to feel good. To go back to my dopamine addiction video, you do it to feel not bad. That's a huge difference. So it just means that there's some issues in this guy's life that he's avoiding, and he has no real sexual proclivity one way or another. Usually the question is, my boyfriend's addicted to like this one certain kind of porn, like petite Latina porn, and I'm a tall white girl. So like, what's going on, right? Does he just want the opposite of me? Does he really not want me? But this question is not that. It's, he's into all different kinds of porn. How do I interpret that? Well, he's just has issues that he's avoiding. That's all. And it's probably nothing sexual. It's just issues in general. It could be something sexual. Well, no, probably is, because sexuality is such a big part of our psychology, and integrating our sexuality crucial for psychological health. So if you're getting distracted with anything, drugs or alcohol too, it's probably some kind of sexual insecurity in its nature. And the final question here. All right, I got through these. There is a narcissist in this person's life, and he's obsessed with smelling her hair. Not in a sexual manner, but just smelling her. Well, what's going on here? Well, I don't know. It may have nothing to do with the narcissism. He may just like your smell. Or, I mean, if I don't really know what you mean by narcissist. I mean, that term gets thrown around a lot. And again, well, let's just say he really is a narcissist. So what he's doing is, he's a narcissist. He doesn't have a strong boundary. He can't communicate. He can't partake in emotional exchanges with other people. He can't sit there and be emotionally present. So he picks up on other mediums of personal exchange to compensate. And people do this with money. Oh, like, I can't be there for my kids, so I'm going to get him a big present, right? Like, you're not there emotionally, so you got to give him money. This is what Italian grandmothers do with food, right? Like, I'm uncomfortable, so I'm just going to spend all day in the kitchen cooking, and the food is going to be the replacement. That is the emotional vehicle. But maybe he's doing this with smell. You can't really receive your presence emotionally, how maybe you would want him to receive your presence, let's just say. So he's cueing in on the smell. Or he could just really like your smell. I mean, that's, it's a very sexual thing, smelling somebody. It could just be that. But again, let's just say he is a narcissist. That's what he's doing. But you know how I say this. If there is a narcissist in your life, not just some random person, but a narcissist who is consistently in your life, then the first thing you got to do is look at, how am I the narcissist? Because there's no way you would be consistently in a narcissist's life unless you had some narcissist tendencies. Now, maybe not to the same degree, not saying that, but part of you is just comfortable with that because that's what you are. Right? Part of you likes the fact that he would just smell your hair as opposed to asking you what's really going on because you're uncomfortable talking about what's really going on. Look, it's fine. Like, we're all narcissists to some degree. We all have, like, if you've ever been passive aggressive, guess what? That's what narcissists do. No boundary, can't communicate. It's fine. Now, is it enough to actually be a narcissist? No, but yeah. So that's what's going on, and that's what I would ask you. If you find yourself perpetually surrounded by narcissists, that's exactly what's going on. All right, guys, I'll leave it there. That's all the questions. Animus at animusempire.com if you have any questions for me, concerns, criticisms, feedback, and animusempire.com/schedule. We do free half-hour consultations. I let you know what I do. Mostly I hear more about what you're going through, and if I can help, then I can help, and if I can't, I'll point you to somewhere that probably would be more helpful. I'll leave it there. Thank you guys again, and as always, I wish you all the joy and the pain that comes from being in touch with reality.